Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on CareersTalk, your go-to destination for all things related to agility. I'm Sunan Sharma, an agile consultant based in Netherlands, and today we are diving into an interesting topic: the role of the project manager in Scrum. And joining us to solve this mystery is the Peter Stephen, having an impressive 40 years of IT experience. Friends, you can watch Peter's previous appearance on our channel discussing 10 agile contracts and the product backlog, the art of splitting stories. I have pinned the links in the description. You can check them after this session. And before we dive in, please show some love by hitting that like button. And if you're new to over here, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So without further ado, let's welcome Peter. Peter, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sinan, for the opportunity to come visit you again. What I've been doing over the past couple months is creating a series of infographics around Scrum, and I created a series around the Scrum team. Okay, and so what I'd like to do is maybe start out by explaining how the Scrum team works. And the question that I get over and over and over is, what happened to the project manager in Scrum? Okay, and if you listen, they say there is no project manager in Scrum, but then you go and you look at people in actual companies, and they have lots of project managers in Scrum, or somewhere. So what happens to the project managers, and how are they going to share with an agile team? So what I'd like to do is just kind of walk through the three roles of Scrum. Kind of how they work, what they're expected to do, and then we'll take a look at the project manager, and then we can see how the roles and responsibilities of the project manager have been redistributed in Scrum. And then afterwards, that's kind of the end of the formal presentation, and then you and I can have a chat with, kind of about where the project manager is or where that role is going. How does that sound?
Perfect. And friends, do
Okay.
not skip any part of this. Otherwise, you will not understand the last slide, which Peter is going to share on project manager, because all these slides are interrelated. So watch complete session, then only you will understand what Peter is talking about. Okay, so do not skip any part. Yeah, Peter, please share your screen.
Okay, here we go. So are we getting the screen?
Yeah, I can see Scrum
Okay.
team in a nutshell. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Now, I've been a Scrum trainer for certified as a Scrum trainer for over 10 years now. And I'm probably not allowed to say this, but I've never been a great fan of the Scrum Guide until the latest one, because what the Scrum Guide does really well is kind of clearly explain what the roles in Scrum are all about. Okay, and the word they use is accountability. Now, if you're a project manager, you know about accountability in the RACI matrix, responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. Responsible means you do it. Accountable means you can get blamed for it. Consulted means they tell you what's happening and they care about what you have to say. And informed means they tell you what's going to happen and they don't care what you have to say. Okay, now that's a little bit snarky, but Scrum redefines that. Okay, and accountability in Scrum is, what do you contribute to the whole? Okay, why are you there? Why are you part of this project? And then responsibilities in Scrum are, what do you do? Okay, and what the Scrum Guide is really trying to do is explain why you're there and say as little as possible about how you do it. So why do we have a Scrum team? Okay, well, it's real simple. The Scrum team is there to take ideas and turn them into value. Okay, and what the Scrum team is expected to do every sprint is create a valuable, useful increment. Okay, the developers create the increment, the product owner is responsible or accountable that it's valuable, and the Scrum Master is accountable for the performance and effectiveness of the team. So basically, we have this one team. They have all the skills and all the authority needed to create value every sprint. Okay, so let's take a closer look at each of those roles. Okay, now, by the way, the Scrum Guide talks about accountabilities, and it actually took a step back from the term roles, okay, because roles kind of define territory, whereas accountability is what you contribute. Now, I'm not going to get too excited about the difference between roles and accountabilities, the subtle differences between them. I think role is an easier word to use. But the thing to remember is everyone in the Scrum team is a member of the same team working towards the same goal. So why do we have a product owner? Well, there are two reasons. Okay, the first is to maximize the value of the product. Okay, so the product owner is thinking every sprint, what is the best thing we could do, in the upcoming sprint that will make the product more valuable? Okay, and the other thing that they do, and this is also to some extent how they do it, they're accountable for managing the product backlog, okay, and for managing it effectively. Now, there's a whole collection of responsibilities. I'm only going to mention one of them because this is really relevant when we talk about the difference between a product owner and a product manager. Sorry, a project manager. A product owner is authorized to make decisions about the product. Okay, we see these decisions in the sequencing of the backlog. We see them in the increment that gets produced every sprint, by the acceptance criteria, and the product owner has has a voice, and therefore by implication the final voice, whether something is done or not, or whether it's worth spending more money on. Now, the key question for the product owner is why? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this sprint? The product owner is going to ask that question an awful lot, and the product owner is going to answer this question an awful lot. Okay, so let's go on to the developers. What do the developers do? Okay, the developers are there to create the product. Okay, so at least once per sprint, could be more often, the developers are expected to create a product increment that meets the quality standards, that is, that meets the definition of done. They're also accountable for creating the plan, for instilling quality, for updating their plan every day, and for holding each other accountable as professionals. Okay, so if I were going to sum up their key questions, the question that they get to answer is how? How are we going to do this? To some extent, how big? That is, if you're doing any kind of estimation or sizing of backlog items, it'll be the developers who do it. And if you have a good development team, you'll expect to hear the question from them, why, quite a bit. Okay, now, as we go through the sprint, at the beginning of the sprint, the product owner comes with an idea what's going to be valuable, comes within some ideas, an initial sequencing of the backlog. And a lot of sprint planning is figuring out, okay, why are we doing this sprint? What's going to bring value? Okay, and when they've agreed on that, then you have what they call the sprint goal, which is kind of the overarching objective for the sprint. And this is some kind of business goal. And then we have to figure out, well, first, what backlog items are we going to implement? And do we think we can implement by the end of the sprint? So that's called creating the forecast. Okay, and then as we get into the, actually get into the sprint and doing the work, every day, the first thing that happens is the developers get together and figure out, what are we going to do today? Okay, how are we going to achieve the sprint goal? Okay, so what we're seeing here, again, this will be relevant when we talk about, the role of the project manager. That day-to-day organization of who does what, that's done by the developers. And it's not done in advance. It's really done on a just-in-time basis based on the current state of work, based on what happened yesterday. Okay, so what does a Scrum Master do? Well, the first thing that's going to happen is, you need to start doing Scrum, or at least something that's close to it. And beyond that, the Scrum Master is accountable for the team's effectiveness. As the project goes on, the teams are expected to get better. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about how to do things, and I think the Scrum Guide has really taken a huge step back in talking about how the Scrum Master does their job. So that's why you'll see words like ensure. Okay, this doesn't mean the Scrum Master does it. The Scrum Master might do it, but the team, the developers might do it, or they might enlist the help of someone else. Okay, so they're trying to give the Scrum Master the maximum flexibility to figure out the best way to do their job. Okay, so what do? Well, first thing is we want to make sure that we're improving. The Scrum Master is expected to be a coach for the team members, for the product owner, for the organization. The Scrum Master is expected to have their eye on anything that's slowing the team down. They're called impediments. Okay, so if something is slowing the team down, the Scrum Master needs to recognize it. Whether they fix it themselves, that's another issue. But they need to make sure that things that slow the team down are being handled. Okay, now, when I've talked to project managers about the role of a project manager, oddly enough, although it is in there somewhere in their basket of accountabilities, it's not really a top line concept. Okay, the idea is people deal with their own stuff. And well, yeah, the buck stops here with the project manager, but dealing with impediments isn't really the main thing. whereas for a for a Scrum Master, it's kind of the top level line item why we're here. I like to think of the Scrum Master as kind of the voice of the common sense. Okay, now some people will say common sense isn't very common, which is true, which is why we need to create it. Okay, and so we're building this kind of common understanding of how we work, both within the team and extending beyond the team. That is, interactions with the rest of the organization or with clients, customers, stakeholders, whoever. So this is something that the Scrum Master has their eye on. So what does this leave with the project manager? Okay, well, the first thing that I did, and by the way, if you're not using ChatGPT or some other AI tool to accelerate yourself, you really ought to be, because you can kind of get right to the point. You can't use the stuff one-to-one the way it comes out of ChatGPT, but you can really use it to kind of focus and sharpen your ideas quickly. So what is a project manager accountable for? Why do we have a project manager? Okay, and there you see the upper left-hand corner, time, scope, cost. Deliver what we asked for, deliver it on time, and deliver it on or under budget. Okay, that's kind of the mission of the project manager. And now you might ask, why do we have Scrum? And the reason we have Scrum is because projects that were managed classically usually failed horribly when they were trying to do things like develop software. And even for more classical projects like building buildings or airports or roads or stuff like that, talk to the folks in Berlin about their airport, or talk to the folks in I think it's Dubai about their tower, and they have massive cost overruns and massive time overruns. Project development, creating something big is hard. Okay, and this expectancy that we can really get things on time, on budget, I mean, it's already a question whether it's reasonable or not. Okay, but that's what a project manager is supposed to do. And I remember some of the first projects that I had. A guy named Rob Reiber, his key question was who does what by when. That's for him what project management was all about. Now we can go through and we look at a whole selection of responsibilities, starting with change management, documentation. Notice change management isn't really about making decisions about the product, okay, or about what you're building. Now, if you're building a runway or a building, well, that runway is not going to change much. But when you're building a software product or dealing with anything complex, that change management is really the heart of what you're doing. Okay. So anyway, we've got a whole series of responsibilities. And so the question is, where do they land? Where do they land in Scrum? So let's take a look at where these responsibilities are in Scrum. And first of all, we go back to the Scrum Guide, and the Scrum Guide says the Scrum team is responsible for everything product related. Okay, the Scrum team builds the product. Okay, so there are a lot of duties that are really focused on the Scrum team as a whole, in particular scope management, risk management, quality management, stakeholder management, reporting, documentation, change management. Okay, these are team responsibilities. So Scrum is a team-based framework. Now, within the team, we see that some of the duties of the project manager are more with the product owner. Okay, so the whole topic of return on investment. Scrum doesn't actually say who is responsible for the money, but it does say the product owner is, accountable for maximizing the value of the product. So I would put return on investment as, kind of a top line item of the product owner. Stakeholder management, I'll call it long-term project planning. What features are we going to deliver when? When are we going to make releases? These are things that the product owner is expected to do, because that's all about making the product valuable. The day-to-day basis, we talked about it, the time management, the project planning within the sprint, issues that the team itself can resolve, that's all with the developers. The Scrum Master is kind of responsible for ensuring that everything works. So that's the Scrum flow. Whether we call that time management or not is kind of an interesting question. And the topic of issue resolution, that is impediments. The Scrum Master is accountable, whether they do it or not, whether they do it themselves personally. Well, like I say, a lot of things can be done by the developers. The Scrum Master is going to get involved when things go beyond the Scrum team, as a kind of rule of thumb. Now, there are some things which are explicitly not allowed. Resource management, the way it's classically done, whereas people are kind of coming in and coming out of the team. especially on a dynamic basis, but even on a phase basis. We want to have all the knowledge in the team from start to finish. I was just watching a talk or an interview with Elon Musk, and he says, everybody in the project is a chief engineer. Everybody understands the whole rocket. And task assignment. No one assigns tasks to anyone. People take on tasks. Okay, it's a collaborative thing. And the last thing is project closure. Okay, Scrum doesn't really define project closure because Scrum assumes that we're building a product, and a product doesn't really end unless it dies, unless no one wants it anymore or no one feels it's worth investing in anymore. Now, what I don't have a slide for, and what I haven't talked about yet, is what does a product owner do, or what does a Scrum team do that a project manager doesn't? Okay, and that's really deciding what to build. Okay, so if we take the case, let's say you've got a mandate from the city government to resurface the runway or extend the runway at the local airport. Now it's entirely possible that the politicians will spend 20 years deciding, what the runway should be. But once they've decided what the mandate is, they can give the mandate, they can put out calls for proposals, they can pick the cheapest bidder who they think can actually do it, and you can make a parts list and you can plan the work out and you can expect it to go according to plan. Okay, that's project management. We know what we're building. Okay, that runway, you can specify it down to the number of runway lights that you have to order. You know exactly what it is. Now, when we're trying to solve a business problem or when we're trying to get our clients to pay attention to us, think if you're doing the next generation smartphone for Samsung or Apple. Okay, there are really only two things you know at the beginning of the year. Okay, it's got to be ready for Christmas, and it's got to be so amazing that a quarter of our existing customers are going to be willing to throw their old one away to buy a new one. What the technology can do, what the features will be, you don't know. You have to figure that out along the way. Okay, and that's the kind of decision that project managers, at least in their current definition, don't usually take. Okay, and so this is where product ownership is different than product management. Ultimately, it's the decision making. And if you have a product owner who is able to make decisions, it's highly unlikely that they're going to be reporting to a project manager who is not empowered to make decisions. It's kind of a weird thing. So anyway, so this is where, how I look at Scrum and project management. It's taken the task of project management, redefined it for a slightly different problem, which is creating a product that's going to live for a very long time. And it's reallocated all of the duties of the project manager, forbidden a few and added a couple, so that we get something which is more suited to product development. Okay, so that's why there's no project manager in Scrum. Back to you, Sunand.
Great, Peter. Can you unshare your screen?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoy it, but I have a few doubts and maybe you can help me with that. So the very first one is, as you mentioned, right, in one of your slides, that we don't have resource manager or resource management over here. But in our real time scenarios, when we onboard any new project, right? So when we take the handover from the project sponsors, we need someone who can take care of resourcing, who can, talk to client with respect to billing and all those things, in case if there are any issues with respect to resource allocation and things like that. So who is going to take care of those kind of responsibilities, Peter, in a large organization?
So that's kind of an interesting question, because notice how in the example you gave, your top level management is thinking in terms of projects. They're going to solve the problem, define the solution, and then hand it off to someone to implement. And then the first thing you have to do is figure out where the people are coming from. And the problem there that most organizations have is everybody is already fully booked. Okay, so you're kind of scrounging resources together, and everybody is working on 3 to 5 projects at once, and everyone's multitasking, and you kind of wonder why it's so hard to make progress. Okay, so one of the things that Scrum was designed to do was break that pattern. Okay, yes, that's how you used to work, but let's look at patterns that are more effective. Okay, and one of the patterns that has shown to be more effective is relatively stable teams. Okay, so the idea is when when one project is winding down, okay, we've delivered the product. Well, what are they going to do with the next product? Well, we've got to, we've either got to create the next product, in which case you'd like to do it with mostly the same team, or you have to find a new product for them to work on. Okay, and so this whole progress, the question could be as simple as, okay, when do we have a team becoming available who can take on this project? And allocating the resources doesn't need to be done because we're not pulling people away from existing projects. Now, that's kind of one solution to the problem. I have been looking at organizations. I've been to like 4 or 5. Is that true? Now, let's say 3 talks this year by large organizations here in Switzerland that have got agile transformations. I won't say behind them, but they've been working on it seriously for at least 5 years. And one of the patterns that I've seen is how the team manager, now we're not talking the project manager, we're talking the team manager, how that role kind of, how shall I say, evaporates, or not evaporates, but it transforms very subtly. The product owner is responsible for what they're building. The Scrum Master is responsible for working effectively and that the process works. Well, who is responsible, or who is the person you talk to when you want to develop your career or something like that? And so, what we're seeing emerge is a people coach role. And I've seen 2 or 3 different flavors of that, and they all kind of, you got one people coach for every 50 people, okay, not one team leader for every 6 people. And so, I could imagine that, large companies, they might still have a, kind of a brokering process to figure out, who's going to build what. But on the other hand, I think, one of the things that we're realizing is that it's usually more effective to bring projects to teams than it is to bring people to projects. Unless you're hiring, maybe you got to hire a new team. That's kind of a different problem. So, I would expect to start out with, well, let's identify a product owner, let's identify a Scrum Master, let's identify a senior engineer for the project. And now we've got a core that we can build the product around or build the project around. Okay, so, the project manager is one solution to that problem, and it's kind of the way people are doing it today. But it's not the only solution to the problem, okay? And there could be others, and I think that's what agility is all about, is looking for better ways. And they might still have the title project manager, they might not. What for me is challenging with the term project manager, and I think maybe the project manager needs to evolve, or the notion of what a project manager is. Project managers aren't allowed to decide about the product. Their stakeholders decided, and their stakeholders are far away from the project, okay? And as the stakeholders come closer to the project, well, maybe the job description of the project owner is going to change, that it looks more like one of the Scrum roles.
That's what my
Possibly.
next question, Peter. Like, what is your
Yeah.
what is your advice for the people who are still into the role of a project manager? Do you think that they need to evolve in that role, or they have to do few other things? What do you think about that?
Yeah. So, first of all, there are a huge number of people out there. The PMI is larger than Scrum Alliance, SAFE, Scrum.org, and everybody else combined. I mean, project management is a huge industry. And I have yet to see any organization voluntarily eliminate its own job description. I have seen cases where we evolve that job description, so it becomes something rather different than what it was before. So, I think, I think there are 2 things that are relevant here. Okay, one of which is the recognition. Usually, we don't know what we're trying to build at the beginning of a project, and we don't know how to build it, and we have to figure these things out. Okay, and so we have to learn quickly. The other thing is about the decision-making process, and how long does it take to make a decision, and how long does it take to change our minds? Changing what it is you're going to build in Scrum can happen every 2 weeks. Changing what you're going to build in SAFE can happen every 3 months, roughly. Okay, the PI planning process. That's where you set your goals. Most large organizations today change their mind about what they're going to fund once a year, although that decision is far less binary and binding than you would think. Okay, so I think the project management role is going to, as it evolves, and you know, there are still IBM mainframes out there. They called it the Z series, and they still sell a lot of them. They're not really driving our understanding of computer science anymore the way they were in the 60s, but they're still hugely important. Um, and I could imagine that the project manager role is going to change, is going to change as well. And I think it's going to take on two issues, one of which is being able to change our mind quicker about what we're building. Um, yeah, actually, I guess it's one issue. It's changing our mind quicker about what we're building, so we're more focused on building the right thing. And probably about getting our stakeholders, that is the people who, our sponsors and the people who understand what it is we're trying to build, getting them closer to the people who are building it. So I think that's, I would predict that project management, and we've seen this with like the PMI is doing their ACP certification, and they're recognizing that we need to be more agile, and agile means being able to react to new information faster. So maybe in I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, the definition of a project manager, or the definition of a project will have changed. They'll have taken away that hard stop at the end, or at least, made that hard stop optional. I mean, I think runways are still going to have a hard stop at the end because sooner or later you're going to want airplanes to land on them. But, anything that's got software in it is going to be an ongoing process. And we know about the Internet of Things. So I don't know, I can say, sorry guys, no landings today. We're going to do an upgrade of the runway. I don't know, could happen.
Great, great. Yeah, I mean, PMI themselves have changed that PMP syllabus now. I think the 50% is now more on Agile and Scrum. So, as you rightly said. So, what I can see from this session, my takeaway is that in future, the product owner and the Scrum Master and the team, the developers' role will also evolve. They will maybe they don't realize that they are extra responsibilities, which maybe they are still doing it, but then they don't realize that they are actually doing the little bit responsibility of a so-called project manager, I would suggest. So yeah, and
Mhm.
yeah, I think you have sum up pretty well regarding that. Yeah, we all are working for a product, not for a project, I think. So that's again a key takeaway for me. So I think, Peter,
Mhm.
we are good for this session. Yeah.
Okay.
So thanks, Peter, for sharing your valuable insight on the topic role of a project manager in Scrum. I thoroughly enjoyed the session and looking for more such sessions in future. And to our wonderful audience, we trust you found this session enjoyable and informative. So kindly give it a thumbs up, hit that like button, and share it with your colleagues on LinkedIn. And until next time, keep agility in your work and life. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Sinan.